Hello and welcome back to Iraq from my hotel room here in Mosul in the north of the country. Since the last video in Basra, Hussein, my tour guide, and Mohammed, my driver from Bil Weekend, the three of us, we drove up back to Baghdad, spent the night in Baghdad, and then from Baghdad yesterday we drove up north here to Mosul. Now the north of Iraq is quite a different scenario to the south in many ways. In recent years ISIS were in this area, and this city in particular was completely devastated by the Islamic State and the fight from the Iraqi Army to liberate Mosul, which is what they did in 2017. But for a number of years during the last decade, ISIS fully controlled this city and many areas around this city as well. So I will be diving into all of that and the history of this city, which has a lot of destroyed buildings, a lot of damage, but also a lot of redevelopment as well, which I will explore. Views of Mosul from my hotel room here. You can see the unfinished mosque started by the regime of Saddam Hussein in the 90s. It was then put on hold after the invasion in 2003, and now they're getting round to finally finishing it off, I believe. Let's head out into the city now. In October 2016, efforts were made by the Iraqi military, American, Canadian, Australian forces to liberate the city of Mosul, and this was the last part of the city that was finally liberated. And after 9 months of bloody battles, house after house, on the 10th of July 2017, Mosul was finally declared free from ISIS, and the last of their fighters fell.
The highest percentage of people lives in here. And during the war, ISIS put each like 3 or 4 families in one house, so they made it as a shield, human shield, and they obliged them to make some tunnels between their houses, so the airstrikes couldn't see them, and some of innocent people still buried until under these rubbles, you know. And this do you see that red sign, the red one? It's related to ISIS. It means noon. Noon refers to Christian people and Christian property.
I see.
Yeah. They were rich before. They did take care about these rocks and about the gate. If you see, like the gate shapes are different. So I think this house is like related to a Christian person. So that is the tunnel that I'm talking about beside the houses, between houses.
I see.
Yeah.
And this is the symbol.
Yeah, noon. Just be careful about your steps.
Looking at the colors and also the architecture,
Yeah.
this was a beautiful building.
Yeah, we used like special kind of colors, like we used the blue and the yellow and kind of red. it's called, like, this place, it's called Iwan. Like the family, like when they afternoon went together here. Yeah, as you can see.
Mm. It is estimated that around 5,000 buildings in Mosul's old city alone were destroyed during the fighting and the ISIS occupation of the city. Last night we arrived here in Mosul quite late, and Mohammed, my driver from Bil Weekend, we met his friend for dinner, and he was telling us what it was like living here under ISIS. And his next door neighbors were a Christian family, and he said his family and their family were like one big family, and they used to join each other for lunch and would spend time together. When ISIS were approaching the city, they chose not to leave, they chose to stay, and ISIS came and killed the family living next door, and he and his father had to drag the bodies of their friends, their neighbors, out of the empty house and bury them. And it was just one story from the first person that we met who lived in this city during those years of terror. Under the regime of the Islamic State, life was a living hell for those 1.5 million people living in Iraq's third largest city, and for those also under them in other parts of the country. Women were only allowed to leave their houses with a male companion. They had to cover their hands with gloves. They would be sold as sex slaves and executed if they refused to comply. People were given lashes for breaking rules, such as smoking or drinking, or perhaps even executed. Many people were executed publicly, and people were forced from their homes in order to watch alongside the other members of their community. ISIS thrived on inciting fear amongst people, and that was how they controlled many parts of Iraq, despite having fewer numbers. All of these were houses before. Today, a pile of rubble, still years on, being cleaned up. It's really hard to fathom just how much effort it is to clean up all of the old city that was destroyed and all of the other parts of the city that were damaged. I mean, we're years on and still it looks like this, and you can only imagine what it would have been like immediately after liberation. Your heart just has to go out to all the people that lived here that are now without homes. Here we are by the riverside. Almost all of the bridges crossing it were destroyed during those years of fighting. Again, some of the city's most beautiful buildings once stood here, as you can see from what's left of the pillars and the interior. Corpse of a dead animal down there. Look at this breathtaking view. So peaceful and quaint. Amongst the rubble here, a child's bag left behind, a shoe, people's clothes. It brings the human side of the story to the forefront a bit more when you can still, years on, see the items and possessions of the people that once lived here. This particular house rebuilt, people who once lived here coming back to repopulate the area despite living on a street with no neighbours. Hopefully in the future, after many years, people will be living here once more, but obviously just the task is enormous.
and I already said that it means it belongs to a Christian family, and this means it's now a property that's for the Islamic Caliphate.
Hussein, who's been with me for the trip since I left Baghdad. This is your first time to Mosul.
It is.
How do you feel being here, and are you surprised at the extent of the damage?
Well, yeah, this is my first time, and for like 5 years I've been just listening to the news and watching everything in the documentaries about how they liberated Mosul. But being here, seeing everything, it's just feel really
surreal.
It is real, it's so real, and just feel weird to me. But I'm glad everything ended, so yeah.
Stopping here on the street to have the dried lemon drink hummus at this nice little place here in a part of West Mosul. This place is called Makan Narvan, if I pronounced that correctly. It's one of the oldest cafe places here in Mosul and still serving today. The man who served us tea here, I believe to be the son of the owner. I think he might make the fastest tea in the world. He is rapid at filling it up and getting it to the benches here. The cafe we've been drinking tea at on the street side here, ironically, is just a stone's throw away from where the Caliphate was born. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi made his famous speech in that very mosque right behind me, which we can't get access to. Effectively the birth of ISIS and encouraging people to join here in Iraq, taking place just right there.
This is one of the famous food here in Mosul. It's kubba, Mosulian kubba. Look, in many cities in Iraq they made it, but they didn't make it, like they don't make it in this shape. We're famous in this shape.
So we have our place here, sat outside on the street once again, and I have the aruk, which is like the kuba from Mosul, fried, not boiled. Essentially a bit like a meat pancake of sorts. Let's try, or a meat pizza, let's say.
You got the kubba.
Really tasty. The kuba has arrived. More succulent and juicier, I would say. And if you were to give me the choice, I think this is the better of the two. Here in one of the parts of central Mosul, still in the old city where we just had the food, is this statue, a tribute to all the workers who helped collect the rubble and are still doing so in the city in the massive cleanup effort following the atrocities and the war. Like many of the buildings and important places in Mosul, there is an eerie atmosphere or quality to be in such a place of historical importance. Now, we've been told to be very careful when walking around inside of buildings here in Mosul because of the fact that things could be falling from the damaged buildings, and not just that, there could be improvised explosive devices, IEDs, that have not yet been discovered. That was a big tactic of ISIS, to lay a lot of these explosive devices, and the Iraqi army could only progress forward very slowly by checking every single point to make sure it was safe for their men to advance, and many people died as a result of these explosions, and there are probably many of them lying around still today. This one, however, was visited by the Pope fairly recently, so we're confident that it's not as dangerous as the others, so I did wander in just a little bit further, but in general, if you visit Mosul, you have to be aware of this. And here is a familiar board which you'll see dotted around Mosul today. UNESCO working on many of the heritage sites that were damaged or destroyed by ISIS, and as a result of the fighting against them.
We're gonna watch the sunsets all over Mosul.
A drive further along the riverside, away from the old city, to Bashtabia Castle, which we are going to climb up to get a vantage point of the sunset over the city.
Another way inside. Sometimes I like to step up here and just walk.
Scenic views from atop the fortress here, of the river down below, and the city on the east and the west side. This fortress has nothing to do with the occupation in recent years. It was already deteriorating from a long time ago. You might be able to see in the very distance there the bridge, which has been repaired, but underneath it you can see the destroyed remains of the old part of the bridge, which is still hanging off in the middle there and hasn't been completely taken away yet. But every single bridge on this river was destroyed during the time of ISIS. Just here, an abandoned church, and then across the way, an abandoned mosque that is currently being rebuilt. Every religion affected. The before picture of this street and the after. A great way to give back to the people of the city handmade items here by the local people to pick up as a souvenir. So on that same street, which has been redeveloped with the souvenir shop, we have this place which translates to our house. It's called Bedna, and it's colourful. You can see there was no roof, but they have smartly placed glass and a new ceiling above with colourful lights, and there's even a museum with some antiques from Mosul down below there, and more tables and chairs for locals to sit at and drink coffee, tea, smoke shisha here with friends in a really nice atmosphere.